You ready? Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you had an enjoyable evening last night and are ready for a good day. So we've got a busy and I hope interesting and fun day planned. So just a couple of things before we start. I told you last night about the conference app and tonight's post-breakout session, for which you have to have a TPIX coin to get in, so be sure to get one. Let me just say a few things about how the conference today will work. First, all the panels and talks are being graphically recorded by Karina Branson over here, and she'll be drawing and capturing the discussions as they happen. And at the end of each session, we should have a canvas that captures sort of the essence of the discussion. We'll see what goes out of it. And as we go, they'll be posted up in the sort of, I guess we call it the pre-function area, so you can look at them and see what you think. You can admire them. And second, we did this last year, but it worked pretty well, so we're doing it again. We're using a real-time interactive tool to help promote engagement, so that allows you to ask questions through your phone, and they'll appear on the screen. Actually, in this case, they may not appear on the screen because we will have slides, but I will be seeing the questions, and we can then relay them. You ask questions, and they will also be moderated, so primarily so that Greg Roston can't make fun of me with everybody watching. But the app is called Slido. So to see how it works, take out your phones, or you can use your computers, and just go to slido.com, slido.com, and enter the code 8139. And that should be it. From there, you can type in questions, and you can include your name, or it can be anonymous, as you choose. The Wi-Fi is TPI Aspen 2019. And I think it's all uppercase, but yeah, all uppercase. Okay. And it's the conference, St. Regis Conference. Okay. And with the app, right, so we're moderating it. We don't actually know whether we're covered by Section 230, but we're going to moderate it anyway. Okay, so to start off the conference today, we are extremely fortunate to have Professor Susan Athey. She is the Economics of Technology professor at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, has also been faculty in the economics departments at MIT, Stanford, and Harvard. Her research focuses on the economics of the internet, marketplace design, auction theory, statistical analysis of auction data, the intersection of econometrics and machine learning. She has a long list of awards, starting with the John Bates Clark Medal in 2007, which goes to the American economist under 40 who has made the most significant contribution to economic thought and knowledge. Susan finished her PhD at Stanford a couple of years before I did. In 1995, when she was on the job market, the New York Times had a front page business article about her, and it said that everybody in the world of economics already knows her. About 24 universities, Berkeley, Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Stanford, and Yale among them, sought her as a junior member of their faculties. It's a very long article that goes on. The article did a lot of things. For one, for the rest of us who are coming along behind, it gave us all permanent inferiority complexes. But also with the benefit of nearly a quarter-century hindsight, there are a couple of problems in the article stood out. One was that there was actually the parts of it were kind of sexist, which was interesting, that things that would not be said today. And that's a problem that economics is just beginning to grapple with. Susan herself has discussed at especially at the most recent American Economics Association meeting. And the other is that while the article seemed over the top, it actually underpredicted her success and the range and importance of her contributions. So she was perhaps the first economist to focus on the intersection of AI, machine learning, and economics, what its implications are, how we can test causality, which is crucial for policymaking, and now add to that blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And when she studies it, she doesn't just write about it for colleagues, she develops classes around it. I know Joe, our summer intern, who I introduced yesterday, has took a class in machine learning with Susan, talks about it a lot. And so she helps to work to transfer this her curiosity and knowledge to new generations. And so we're truly lucky to have such a pioneer with us today. So I'll hand it over to Susan.
Well, thanks for such a warm introduction, and I certainly didn't mean to make grad students feel stressed out. So today I'm going to be talking about artificial intelligence for public good. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about having gotten into this area relatively early is that we've seen this kind of hype cycle where everything went from, oh, I don't think this is important, to being like, wow, it's so wonderful, look at all the great things, to now sort of having this very strong backlash and concerns. And so I actually think it's really a testament to TPI and the organizations like this that have been trying to bring a more disciplined and sort of research-based approach to think about these problems for a long time. And was kind of frustrating early on trying to get people interested in the research community and more broadly in the potential challenges. And of course, we needed to be prepared for consequences. So today I'm going to take at some point, I would stand up and give talks about all the concerns we should worry about, but now everyone's talking about those already. So let me come back to a more positive view of possibilities as well. Before I get started, it's less relevant to this talk, but I always like to make sure that I mention any kind of conflicts of interest and relationships I have. I was consulting chief economist for Microsoft for many years, and I did a lot of work on search industry. Now I'm on the boards of directors of Expedia and Lending Club, as well as Rover, Ripple, and Turo. And so actually, issues related to all of these companies will be discussed today. And again, that makes me even more happy that people are talking about the issues. So let's see, oops, is my clicker, what do I need to do to make my clicker talk to something? Can someone advance the slide? The first one up gets to test out the tech. Okay, now can you go back to the slide 2? Very good. There we go, perfect. All right, so just to start out, I want to give a big framing for some of the high-level issues that I think we should be thinking about from a sort of research and policy community about AI. And I should mention that I'm an associate director of a new institute we're building at Stanford called the Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. And so we've been spending a lot of time among different disciplines over the last 2 years really thinking about what the open challenges are and what we can do as leaders to push the research agenda in the right direction. So some of the questions that we've identified, first is what's the next generation of AI technology? I'll be talking about what we can do with some of the basic predictive technologies that have been coming out. But one of my takes on this theme is that we really need to move the AI technology to be much smarter in the sense of thinking about cause and effect and about better supporting human decisions rather than just taking a lump of data and finding correlations in it, which can lead to a lot of problems, everything from the discrimination and fairness and other kinds of unintended consequences. And bringing together some of the insights that we've worked on for many years in the statistics and social sciences community about how to use data in a more structured way can lead to safer and more fair AI. A second question is, how should AI be designed and deployed? And so, when we think about what the research community, one of the ways that you can really understand what the important questions are is to work with deployments of AI in practice. And so I think one reason that I was a little bit more prescient than some about what the issues were going to be was that I spent time working in a search engine where we had every problem. We had people typing in requests for everything from guns to illegal types of firearms and drugs and hate speech coming into the search engine. So we had to deal with lots of policy issues from the very beginning. intellectual property issues, and so on. And so when you go to see a technology deployed, that's when the rubber hits the road, and you can understand what questions do very smart people actually not know the answer to. And so and one of the themes and how we think that we can inform the research community about this is to try to make engagements with social impact firms and nonprofits who are much more open to sharing the research learnings and allowing researchers to come in and understand what's going on. So I've started an initiative at Stanford GSB that's focusing on these partnerships. And so we will help researchers match up with firms. It might be a young ed tech startup or a worker retraining type of startup, and have the researchers go in and help the startup solve their problems while simultaneously publish research articles out of it that disseminate best practices, but also solve unsolved problems, again, on everything ranging from fairness and discrimination to other types of privacy and policy issues. And then, of course, finally, we have to think about how AI technology affects humans and society. And a lot of that, of course, the researchers have been already trying to study. What's the impact of AI on labor markets, on inequality, on urbanization, on transportation? But we have a long way to go in getting high-quality research there. So that's what we're going to be doing. And then if we go out and try to really solve these problems, it's, of course, going to be interdisciplinary, and there's also going to be interactions among all three of these types of questions. And so one of the places that I'm very excited about is that the social science, the policy scholars, and so on really have a long history of thinking rigorously about these problems. The engineers and the computer scientists are much newer, and I think they're just starting to appreciate that actually talking to other experts could be helpful. There's a little bit of hubris from that side of the table, but as they've hit major roadblocks and challenges, they've suddenly gotten much more interested in talking across communities, and so we're seeing a lot of engagement there. Okay. So that's sort of an overview of research themes that I see. If we go out to now understand this phenomenon and why it's going to be important across all areas of public good, we can start with the famous Marc Andreessen quote that software is eating the world, but it's really true. Across the economy, firms in all industries are digitizing. Once you digitize, then you suddenly have the ability to do things you didn't do before. As soon as you digitize, you need software to manage the data. And then you can start to optimize. And you can optimize in ways that were just really inconceivable or science fiction in the past. And so, so then we get to both automation as you become more software-driven, as well as data-driven optimization. And there's I'm putting a whole bunch of different things into that bucket, but it can be everything from the algorithms that show you different products on the page, to optimizing the supply chain, to optimizing the production line in a factory. And as an example I'll talk about a little bit later, trying to monitor workers and help make sure that the workers are safe and that they're providing a safe experience for customers. And so that data-driven optimization can really go across lots and lots of different areas. And so I'll be giving some examples in the sort of social impact space of that type of optimization. And of course, the more optimization you do, the more data you create as you log all of the experiments and things that you've been doing. And so it becomes a bit of a feedback loop. Now let me talk a little bit about the technology. This is a pretty sophisticated audience, so I'm going to go fast here and just make a few sort of observations on top of what you all know. When I think about what the biggest technical innovations have been in the last 10 years, it's a lot about the deployment of neural nets. And it's important to remember that neural nets by themselves solve a very simple problem. They have been deployed in combination to solve more complex problems, but the basic building block that got a lot better is actually solves a very simple problem. And from a sociology of science perspective, it's very interesting how they basically put up a big public data set that had lots of labeled images, and then thousands of scientists met multiple times a year, and the yardstick of success is, can you do a better job classifying these images? And every scientific conference in computer science you go to would have half the presentations would be about how they improved the goodness of fit, the mean squared error, in a held out test set of classifying cats and dogs. You think, wow, maybe that's a bit of a misdirection of effort. But it's actually, it served a really good purpose because everybody agreed what the challenge was, and so it really motivated people to push forward in that direction. But in the process of trying to get the very best goodness of fit in classifying images, you sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater of every other aspect of data analysis or thinking about what the data means, because you have to use every bit of correlation in the data to predict in this particular data set, and there's a cost of any other considerations or constraints that you put on the problem. And so these really are black box algorithms that are just trying to do the best job with cats and dogs. So I could have a long conversation about all the things that can go wrong with that type of setting. One of the things here, I've picked this image with the cat, and the cat's playing a piano. So the neural net that's trying to classify cats and dogs is going to not be told anything about anatomy or structure or anything else. It just finds patterns in the pixels. So if black and white rectangles are predictive of cats, we're gonna find, and if you see an animal with a piano, it's going to be more likely to be classified as a cat. Now, that's not a problem if you're running Google Images, because you can retrain your data every day, and if my piano-playing dog makes a new craze on YouTube, and we see lots of pictures of piano-playing dogs, within a day or so, Google will figure out that problem and retrain their algorithm. So these algorithms work really well in an environment where you can update the models faster than the world is changing. But in scenarios where you might train a model, say, for a hospital situation or for credit scoring, we're in a regulated environment or something else where the world changes faster, there's actually benefits to having models that are stable, that are interpretable, that will hold up across a range of circumstances, and that really capture the structural features of the problem. And that actually has been mostly thrown out by the off-the-shelf machine learning. And so part of my research agenda has been to bring it back without giving up the computational benefits of machine learning. And it's very much possible, but it wasn't the focus of the last 10 years of research in computer science. When you think about what are the benefits about these algorithms, when I talk to people who've traditionally done data work, I say, well, you used to go out and have your research assistant build 10 different models, or in a financial services company, your team might explore different versions of a regression for credit scoring. Now what machine learning is, it's a robotic research assistant that will explore billions of models and then come back with the one that does the very best fit. Now, in that environment, because you worry about the problems of overfitting to the data, there's a very explicit consideration of using cross-validation and other techniques to make sure you don't overfit. So it won't overfit to specific sample points, but it will overfit, if you like, to any types of correlations that are just unique to this moment in time in this data set. And so here's a picture out of a McKinsey marketing brochure that's about predicting customer churn. They're contrasting an old model where there's this green curve across it that would say people above the curve are likely to churn and people below the curve are less likely to churn. The axes are different characteristics of consumers. They say, look at my great machine learning model. Now it's got these beautiful, more complex patterns that you never would have discovered. Except as an economist, I know there is no driver A and driver B in the world that has that kind of a non-monotone pattern. There's nothing where you hold driver A constant and you increase driver B, churn goes up and then down, and then up and then down, and then up and then down. So if you actually look at this picture, it's not actionable for decisions or for product development or anything else. It's exploiting complicated correlations in the data that might not hold up and might not be stable. So I think this is a marketing brochure that is actually a cautionary tale about how you want to use these models and how careful you would need to be with them. Okay, so now let me go through some specific public good applications, and I'm going to talk about challenges as well as research opportunities with each of these applications. So one of the very first and widely diffusing AI applications in the social good space has been about granular measurement at scale. So if you're the World Bank, if you're the IMF, if you're any type of global NGO, you want to understand where the problems are, and you also have been trying to intervene over time, and you realize that it's actually pretty hard for you to measure the impact of anything that you're doing. Government statistics are sparse. You have surveys of a couple thousand people. You can't really break out the data in any meaningful way. And so this class of research papers has basically gone out and gotten things like satellite data, Google Street View data, and other large-scale data sources where you have in this photograph data, you have a picture of everything, so you can see the whole universe. Of course, you don't know what those pictures mean, but then you pair those pictures up with a survey, where you know for certain data points how rich or poor was this house, how successful was the village. And then you use machine learning to see what characteristics of pictures predict, say, economic well-being. And then you can deploy this model at scale, and you can also potentially run it back in time. So suddenly you have a huge panel data set where you have observations for the whole universe over time at monthly intervals, and you can potentially use that to evaluate what's happening in a country or a city. Now, that all sounds great, but of course there's many problems with that. Again, the models may not be stable, so you may not be able to go back in time, and you need to make sure that you have old surveys to make sure that the relationships are constant over time. The second is if you start using this to allocate resources, it's manipulable. So if shiny roofs look rich and you don't give aid to rich villages, well, everybody can go out, have a party, cut down some tree branches, and put them on top of your roofs so that you'll get your aid. Okay, and of course that's a very contrived example, but actually in this picture you see the blue are roofs, and the quality of the roof is one of the things that predicts poverty in Sri Lanka in this example. So there's challenges if you go from just describing and measuring to actually taking action based on these machine learning problems. So this raises another research area. One of my former PhD students is doing a lot of work on this about manipulable machine learning. And it's certainly something you have to think about in the credit scoring space. The picture, the green and red picture is a picture out of MIT Media Lab where they've classified the safety of streets based on Google Street View. And one of the things you see in the map, green is safe, red is unsafe in Manhattan, is you can just, looking at the map, you can see sort of pockets of poor performance of the predictive algorithms where something like a bridge looks unsafe, but there's probably not a lot of crime on the bridges. It's just the bridges look like empty industrial areas, which might be more full of crime. And so if you actually were going to give a loan or make a decision based on this, you would have systematic groups that might be harmed by this or might get poor results. And so the machine learning community hasn't been very good about expressing the uncertainty in their estimates and telling you when the models can be well trusted and when they can't. So when I teach exec ed, you see groups that have built these models, say in a bank, and sent them over to loan officers. The loan officers say, I don't want to listen to your dumb machine learning model. I looked at it and it doesn't make any sense. I don't trust it. And that's partly the fault. It's not just that they're Luddites, it's also the fault of the AI engineers who haven't completed the loop. They haven't really thought about how to communicate, how to use the output, and when it's trusted and when it's not. I'm an expert, and I would not trust the model out of the AI group in the bank because I don't think that they've been trained fully to think about the problems in their model. And we know in academics that you can spend years on a model and it's still going to have problems. So until I've seen some more deep insight about where the training data came from and how to interpret it in various settings, I wouldn't want to make decisions on it either. So that's a part of the research that we need to bring forward, and we also have to be demanding that of the engineers. And of course, when you think about the problems tech firms have, part of it is that we have engineers building these things and nobody bothered training them in any of these add-on analytics or interpretation or unintended consequences. We just sent them through the contest to predict the cats and dogs and threw them out into the world and gave them responsibility for building the products that affect our lives. It's not that they were ignoring best practices, it's that we didn't develop them. And I think that that's really a responsibility of society and universities and across industry responsibility, not just the responsibility of the firms, although of course they do have responsibility as well. When we got another big application of AI for good is optimizing government resource allocation. So you can start with simple risk prediction. So you might think, okay, I'm gonna predict whether a building is gonna have a fire, or I'm gonna predict whether there's gonna be a violation, a health code violation. In the first step, you can just build this model and start to draw a map of where the risk is and start to get a sense of what's going on and how much heterogeneity there is in risk and how predictable is risk. The next step is to use it to prioritize resources. And in the private sector, this is a very common application of machine learning and AI. You have salespeople who go out and call, and this prioritization of who should the salespeople call is something that's been commercialized, and there's lots of products out there to help you prioritize who to call. You can also, and there's also been applications for city inspectors and so on. Where should the city inspector go? Now, at first this looks great, and it can give you, 10x or 100x improvements in efficiency by avoiding sending an inspector out to a place that you know to be very likely to be fine. But it still can lead to a variety of challenges. I'll talk about a couple related to causal inference in a moment, but also it can potentially lead to discrimination as well as manipulability. Like if we figure out that we should only inspect sushi restaurants and we should never inspect, French restaurants, the French restaurants might start to get sloppy if they know they're not going to get inspected. So their behavior today is with respect to a random inspection scheme. If we change the inspection scheme, we do have to think about the incentives of the people involved. But if you think about it hard and you actually do a really good job involving the latest social science and the best practices in AI, you actually can use these types of models to identify or reduce discrimination as well. Humans are pretty biased. Algorithms can be very biased, or they can be less biased. And you can actually put constraints on the algorithms, and you can measure directly their performance, while the humans are hard to change, and it's hard to influence. So the algorithms have a lot of potential to correct bias if deployed well. Just some examples. There's predictive policing and firefighting. Like in New York, they had this Firecast model that would prioritize risky buildings for inspections using machine learning. Other types of applications that you're probably all familiar with are things like helping judges determine who should get bail, and helping caseworkers decide which homes should be visited and have more detailed inspections when you get a complaint for Child Protective Services. One thing that I want to highlight across both of these examples are these as examples where a human is making a decision, often in 5 to 10 minutes, about something that's very impactful for the subject's life. And in that scenario, there's potentially a lot of data available in the person's history, in their legal history, in the family's interactions with social services, but the judge or the caseworker just doesn't have time to read it all, and also has not seen enough of the overall data to necessarily draw the statistical inferences that might be merited. They might be using rules of thumb that are wrong. And so in those types of settings, having a machine learning model that's systematically and objectively trained across a lot of data, in principle, could lead to much better decisions in these cases where the humans just don't have time to consider all the information. But we have to be very careful about unintended consequences in these settings, and that's the big science problem. One of the things that people get confused about when they talk about this is whether the algorithm is making the decision or mimicking the decision maker. And there's two types of outcomes you can train. So if you are making the decision, that's like when you're training the model on, was the child ultimately found to be abused? Or did the person actually commit a crime when they went out on bail? Or after interviewing and flying out the person, were they hired? That's the final objective. When you train a model for the final objective and you actually have data for the thing you're trying to optimize, then in principle, if you do enough experimentation, you can really reduce bias in those data sets by getting an objective model that maximizes the final objective. But if you're just mimicking the decision maker, which is a much easier thing to do because you have a lot of data about past decisions, if you just try to build an algorithm that mimics the judge or mimics the caseworker, then if the caseworkers used racist heuristics or sexist heuristics, the model will too, and you'll reinforce those biases. So you have to be very cautious about, even when you discuss this, about what kinds of data are being used and what the objectives are as to whether you think this is going to be good or bad. Let me actually skip forward on this a little bit. So one of the things that comes out of the machine learning community is that we're training, like we put 1,000 people a year through the machine learning class at Stanford now. So people say, oh, is machine learning hard? I'm like, how hard can it be if 1,000 people a year take it, right? I mean, Stanford gets smart kids, but 1,000 is a lot. So one of the things that we do in those classes is we basically teach the kids that every problem is a problem where you have X's and you want to predict Y, and then they go across a bunch of algorithms to do that. And so they're trained that every problem is a prediction nail, and they've got this great big hammer that hits the nail. And so, of course, when we think about making decisions, we think about intervention. And in social sciences, we've put a lot of emphasis on causal inference and understanding what is the impact of a policy, what is the impact of an inspection regime, and so on. And that has not been the emphasis of certainly what we do in 101, 102, 202, and 303 in machine learning. It's only really a small set of machine learning people who have focused on that. So if I compare prediction versus what-if problems, prediction is like, is this a cat? Is the review positive? And in those types of things, you can hold out a test set and just objectively evaluate your performance. And so these are also easy problems in the sense that I don't care how the black box works because I just can test it. If I have a hidden data set in my drawer and the algorithm can tell the cats and dogs apart, I don't really care how it works. It works, it's great, I'll use it. But the kinds of questions we think about in policy analysis are what-if questions. Stuff like, what will happen to sales if I raise prices, if I change prices to something I haven't done before? What was the return on investment on something? Return on investment means the benefit if you do the investment versus if you don't do the investment. That requires a counterfactual, considering two possible worlds, one of which might not have happened. If you did the investment, you don't know what would have happened if you hadn't done the investment. And that kind of causal inference is actually much harder. And that has been the subject of people's both statistical expertise, but also domain expertise, because it takes certain features of a data set to even have it be possible, theoretically possible, to answer what-if questions. There are lots of data sets where you can prove a theorem that says you cannot answer the question with that data. So there was a nice paper out of Columbia that evaluated one of these prioritization cases, and it was about customers quitting. They said, let me find all the customers who are most likely to quit. Then they ran a randomized experiment to see for whom did having a sales call improve their retention the most. And there was only a 50% overlap between the customers that were identified to be at risk and the ones for which an intervention helped. And of course, it only takes 5 minutes to think why that might be the case. Some customers are quitting because they don't need your product anymore. They're moving away. They're shutting down. No sales call is going to help that. And just predicting who's going to quit doesn't sort out for whom an intervention is most helpful. And that's going to come up in city and government applications as well. Now, why do people do the dumb thing? They do the dumb thing because it's easy. You don't have to run an experiment. Well, if you really want to understand what works, you have to actually cooperate with the firm and gather data in a different way to get a rigorous answer. That's expensive and time-consuming. And that's one reason that people are sloppy, because the sloppy is also easy. Another application that I think has a lot of potential, but I predict in 2 or 3 years this is going to be a big topic at this conference as well, because it's just going to become pervasive, is surveillance. So I'm using surveillance kind of in a negative way, but actually it can be very, very beneficial, but it's also going to be something we have to think hard about. So just as an application, marketplaces like Uber or Lyft or dog walking services like the ones I work with, they all need to provide incentives for their workers to provide high-quality service. These are really independent service providers or independent entrepreneurs, and you really need to try to motivate them to do a good job. Now, in the past, we used occupational licensing and things like that, barriers to entry, but now we can gather data and see how they work. So here's a little study. This was done by a company that uses your phones to monitor the quality of your driving. So you might not know this, but your phone can tell if you speed, if you handle the phone, if you have a hard brake, a hard acceleration. All that's right there in your phone. And you can get that to a very high degree of accuracy. So in the study, they put 1,000 phones in Ubers and 1,000 phones in taxis and found that using the telemetry from the phones, that the Ubers were substantially safer than the taxis. I thought this was very interesting, and so I went out and did a much larger study using data from Uber. And in Chicago, Uber dispatches both taxis and UberXs. And so using a variety of techniques, I was able to match up the rides to be same starting point, same ending point, same time of day, and use the telemetry to see how the rides were better or worse. And so what we found was that across almost all the metrics, the UberXs were driving more safely. They did a bit more in terms of handling the phone for not surprising reasons, but they generally were providing an experience that then, when also matched up against star ratings and other metrics, was an experience that was better for the riders. Then we tried to understand why, so there was a large-scale experiment where the drivers were nudged to better performance. They were given information about how well they were doing that was not tied to their pay or their ability to stay on the app. And it turned out that if you got little exclamation marks that told you were below average in terms of hard brakes or accelerations or things like that, the bad drivers improved their performance even without explicit incentives. So one of the reasons I think this is such an important thing to start thinking about is that, wow, this is incredibly powerful. And if you think about it more broadly, we can use machine learning with videos of workers in all sorts of settings, and we can use machine learning to say, is this a safe experience or not a safe experience at scale? And we're seeing companies use this on the assembly line, and it's potentially got huge benefits for productivity and safety. Of course, it raises all sorts of other issues, because if it's so beneficial, then people are going to do this a lot. And wow, how do we think about this as a society? What are the worker protections? What laws need to be put into place? How do we think about privacy and so on? So I think this will be a really big issue going forward that we need to think about. Okay, so there's lots more to say. Let me just actually sum up with some of the things that we're doing in our lab to give a sense of how AI can directly solve a lot of the problems of inequality. One thing that we've been specifically focused on is low-cost delivery of information, training, and nudges. And these are situations where people maybe didn't have access to the right information, or it was too expensive to access it. Now that people have phones, people have the ability to make use of time that they didn't make use of before. You're standing in line, you're on the bus. Now you have time that has low opportunity cost. At the same time, I can deliver, if services become more and more digital, I can deliver those to you at very low marginal cost. And so if you think about the whole space of places where more information, more nudges, more training would be helpful, if I develop those and make them work well and make them personalized, I can implement them at scale. So some of the things we're doing at Stanford are partnerships with a lot of different organizations, nudges for financial health, targeted application of training programs, digital tutors and digital training, decision-making applications that help people choose what training program to use or what kind of contraceptive would be the best fit for a patient, getting people to do more charitable giving. And these are all, what the amazing thing is, with just a lab at Stanford, I can develop AI technology that in principle can be deployed at scale if I find a partner that has access to a set of users or consumers who could benefit from it. And so that's a really exciting area, and I think that we're also going to see governments engaging in that at a larger scale as well. So I think I'll close here with this, again, positive view of all the good things that we can do with the proviso that in each of these applications, they're selected to also have important policy, privacy, and overall ethical issues that need to be worked through, where the best practices will be important to develop if we want to actually encourage people to use them at scale. So I'll stop here. Thanks. I should have asked you when I was supposed to stop, since it started very late. But
yeah, that's fine. So we should take questions, but there were a few questions on Slido, so I'll just start with those and get your questions ready. So Drew Clark, I don't know where he is, but he asked, oh, right there. Are the policy issues surrounding AI mostly the same as the policy issues for privacy, but on steroids, or are they of a different class?
So privacy is certainly a really big bucket, but I think the issues, when the AI starts to optimize, you give it an objective, and it can lead, if you actually let it really influence decisions, it can react strongly to small differences in data. So I think like the fairness issues and unintended consequence issues, when you have an active system that can really that is given the freedom to make decisions, you can get many worse consequences, and also you can get to bad places very quickly and at larger impact. So I think of like the old world as like there's sort of offline analysis, and we have some data and we need to keep it safe, and maybe once every few years we'll come up with a new thing to do with it, while the modern systems are coming up with new things every day, and even the engineers that are building them don't understand them. And so you need a much more active approach to monitoring, assessing, measuring, and guiding those systems.
Is the limitation in facial recognition because of poor training, or is it a real technical issue? Should we be worried for 5 years from now? That was an anonymous question.
Well, so I guess I'm in terms of like the limitations for facial recognition, one of the limitations was that it was much better at whites than blacks. I saw a paper presented at an AI conference. I didn't study the details to make sure it was right, but they studied the companies that had been publicly shamed for having low accuracy for brown people, and found that those companies within the space of a year had gone from like accuracy in the 70s to accuracy about 97 of identifying people versus animals. It was very close to whites, while the companies that had not been publicly shamed remained in the 70s. And so whether or not, again, I don't want to endorse that finding because I didn't referee it, but I think that that's very plausible to me, because actually a lot of these problems can be solved with some effort and expense. And I think that it wasn't that the engineers were trying to screw up. They just weren't trained to think about these things. They just built a system, and they were rewarded for predictive accuracy, and they weren't even tools available to them to automatically break out their data. They would have had to take their own private time and do the analysis after work to discover these things. And so part of what we need to do is build in that analysis time into the regular course of business for all of these algorithms.
You could either pick from there, or we can go to directly.
Scott, what's the Slido?
8139.
So there was a question about the risk of bias in credit decisions also get a response by loan officers. Bias at one bank is a profit opportunity at another bank. I think that one interesting thing about the credit application is that it is actually a market situation. So if one company gets better at AI, then another company is going to get a bunch of lemons. So the good company is going to cream skim all the good people, and then the company that doesn't have as good AI is going to get a bunch of losers. Then they're going to think that everybody's very risky. Then they won't try to make as many loans, and they become increasingly uncompetitive. So you can get unraveling of markets. So asymmetries in information can be important. You also see this happening a lot in advertising markets, actually. If one company, for whatever reason, has privileged access to data, they can cream skim all the good consumers' opportunities, and then the competing advertising marketplaces just have a bunch of bots left over, and they look really bad, and then nobody bids a high amount for those impressions, and then you get an unraveling and a loss of competition. So I think generally it's actually important for competitiveness to have all the firms be, somewhat equally good and have access to equal information, but that can be a hard thing to do. It can pressure firms to use black box algorithms quickly, but then they might also have mistakes. So I think it actually does introduce risk, a bunch of different kinds of risk into the system, and that's something regulators need to be thinking about as they go forward.
Yeah, I've got a question. Tony Hadley with Experian. I'm wondering your thoughts on government oversight of AI as it's used in models. For example, many of the financial institutions have to have a model governance program that they have to show their regulator and justify all their models, what they're attempting to try to prove, whether they're proving it, and how they're adjusting it and validating it and revisiting that model on a continuing basis. You believe that FTC has the ability to, for example, have oversight of non-financial models in that way, or should it? Should companies be required to show their model and show their model governance programs to a regulator?
So that is a great question, and I've actually been out on a soapbox a little bit to the financial regulators already, saying, guys, you're way behind, and regulating this new type of technology requires an expertise that you must develop. I've had many large financial institutions tell me there are cases where they could implement a machine learning model to solve a problem much more efficiently, but regulatory reasons prevent them from deploying it. In the old world, you had a process, and so if everybody agreed with your process, then if there was a mistake, then they would audit, did you follow your process? And if you followed your process well, then the penalty for a mistake is lower. But a machine learning model makes mistakes, okay? And not only, you can't hide that it makes mistakes, like you have to demonstrate the error rate. Like that's just an intrinsic part of estimating the models. So if you think about something like avoiding sanctions violations, an error rate is actually not acceptable according to regulation. And so we have to change our regulatory structure to accommodate a world where the firms demonstrably and and have recorded themselves to accept an error rate. If you think about the PR consequences for a firm, somebody's going to come back 5 years later and said, hey, you accepted an error rate, and that had really negative consequences for this consumer. So having the regulatory scheme has got to adapt and say, we cannot deploy the most efficient systems unless we actually accept errors, and we actually give some cover to firms who have followed a process of trying to minimize errors, but they know that they exist. You cannot be error-free. So when we go to think about the broader questions of regulation, like right now, we don't even have regulators who are able to understand the most basic cost-benefit analysis in the regulatory sort of structure. At least the firms don't. Hasn't been common knowledge that that's the case. And if you go to more subtle things like discrimination, where even the scientists don't exactly agree about how you should do things and where there are real trade-offs, we're much farther away. So I do think ultimately how they regulate is, of course, something all of you need to decide. But the expertise has got to be there. So I think each regulatory agency is going to need to hire people with the right technical expertise, bring in panels of experts, and really develop the expertise for what they should do. Of course, then we'll be constrained by policy and other, the legislative process and everything about how we deploy that expertise.
Do you want to do maybe one more? Got 3 votes.
Sure. Yeah, so the relevance of behavioral economics to AI research. So I think this is really, really important, and I didn't have time to expand on it, but that's really an emphasis of the lab that I'm building at Stanford. So a lot of these applications where you're going to do training or education or nudges in practice really rely on being able to make the experience engaging and motivating for the people so that they get the education and training they need. If you try hard enough right now, there is a ton of education. You can learn to do lots of things on YouTube and Khan Academy and other places, but people are not availing themselves of that, and there's a whole bunch of frictions and gaps that keep them from doing so. So being able to figure out what is the right content for the right person at the right time in a way that's engaging and where they really feel the benefits of what they're doing is a huge challenge. And of course, across all the ways that the tech firms interact with consumers, whether it's people getting addicted to YouTube or other types of concerns we have, the behavioral economics is super important. We have to think, how paternalistic are we? Where are we confident that somebody's doing something that's not in their own good, and we feel comfortable pushing them in a different direction than what they're actually exhibiting in their own behavior? So it's not just how do I convince people to do something, but it's actually thinking through the efficiency and the ethical issues around what we do when someone doesn't behave in a way that's best for their own good, when they just keep clicking one more video in something that's not helpful to them, or playing one more game instead of doing something that they would feel better about tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very interesting. We'll have chocolate for you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we'll move on to the productivity panel. So if you're on it, you should come on up here, which means Susan has to come back up here.